maybe you should know that.
As the sun descended below the horizon, it painted the world in a gentle amber glow. Ryan knew that today's evening would be different. Her boss, Jungkook, had been acting strange lately, always finding excuses to talk to her, to be alone with her. It was unsettling to say the least. She had tried to brush it off as him being in a good mood, but deep down she knew that there was more to it. As she stepped into his office, her heart raced. He was sitting behind his desk, a somber expression on his face. She took a deep breath and closed the door behind her, hoping that whatever he had to say, it wouldn't be as bad as she feared. Ryan, he began, his voice quiet but intense. I need to talk to you about something. Her stomach flipped. This didn't sound good. I've been meaning to tell you this for a while now, that I have feelings for you. Her mouth dropped open. This was not at all what she was expecting. And I was hoping that maybe you could be my girlfriend. Boss, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I'm flattered. Truly I am. But we work together. We can't be together. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with anger. Why not? He demanded. Why can't we be together? She took a step back, feeling unsettled by his sudden outburst. You're my boss, she said, her voice shaking. It wouldn't be professional. We'd never be able to have a normal relationship. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. He slammed his hand down on the desk, causing her to jump. Fair? He shouted. Do you really think anything in this world is fair? Life isn't fair, Ryan. People get screwed over every day. They have to make do with what they have. She opened her mouth to respond, but he... And what about you? What do you think about me? Do you like me or not? I think you hate me. His words stung, and she bit back her anger. I'm not saying that, she said quietly, but it's not something that can happen. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, his expression twisted into a bitter smile. Oh, is that so? Well, maybe it's time you learn that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the things you want. He stood up, towering over her. And I want you, Ryan. I want you more than anything. She could feel his anger radiating off him, and she took another step back. So, you'll have to decide, he said, his voice low, and do you want to not keep your precious job, or do you want me? The weight of his words pressed down on her like a leaden clock. She knew she couldn't ignore him any longer. She had to choose, but as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if she made the wrong choice. Would she lose her job? Would he make her life a living? The thought her. But deep down she knew that she couldn't keep running away from the truth. She had to face it. "I need some time to think about this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't give you an answer right now." Jungkook's expression darkened, but he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "You have until the end of the week to make up your mind. If you decide that you want me, then we'll talk. If not, well, I'm sure we can find someone else to take your place." With that, he turned his back on her and walked around the desk, sitting down again. She didn't dare move, not until the door was safely shut behind her. The weight of his words pressed down on her as she made her way back to her desk, and she knew that she had a decision to make. A decision that would change her life forever. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely able to focus on her work. Every time she looked at Jungkook, she could feel the tension between them thicken. He seemed to be avoiding her gaze, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before he brought up the subject again. That night she lay awake in bed, her mind racing. She thought about all the reasons why they couldn't be together, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. He was her boss, and she had always admired him from afar, but she also knew that there were consequences to their relationship, both for her career and for him. She thought about what it would be like to be with him, to share her life with someone who understood her the way he did. But she also knew that she couldn't put her job in. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and she didn't want to throw it all away for a man, no matter how much she cared for him. Finally, she made her decision. The next day, she went to Jungkook's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Come in," he said, his voice sounding. She opened the door and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Boss," she said, her voice steady. "I've thought about what you said, and I appreciate the offer, but I can't do this. I can't be your girlfriend." He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded, feeling a lump forming in her throat. "Yes, I'm sure." He leaned back in his chair, stapling his fingers together. "Okay, I understand," he said finally. "And I'm sorry for yesterday. You don't have to quit your job, and I won't push you further on this. But Ryan, just remember that I will always care for you, even if we can't be together." She forced a smile, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "Thank you, boss," she said, turning to leave the room. Jungkook watched her go, feeling a pang of regret in his chest. He knew that he couldn't force her to be with him, not if she truly didn't want to. But he also knew that he wouldn't be able to forget her anytime soon. Their connection had been too strong, too real. He wondered if they would ever be able to work together again without the tension between them growing even thicker. As Ryan walked away, she knew that she had made the right decision, even though it hurt. She would find a way to move on, to focus on her work and her career. And maybe, one day, she would find someone who would be able to give her the relationship she had always wanted. But for now, she had to accept that some things were simply not meant to be. As the weeks passed, Ryan tried her best to focus on her work, to forget about the nightmare she had just lived through. She knew that he was still watching her, still evaluating her, but she refused to let it bother her. She was going to make it on her own merits. Jungkook too tried to move on. He threw himself into his work, traveling more often, spending less time in the office. But every time he saw Ryan, his heart ached a little bit more. He knew that he couldn't replace her, not with anyone else. She was the one who understood him, who challenged him, who made him feel alive. He knew that they had made the right decision, but that didn't make the pain any less sharp. One day, as they found themselves working side by side on an exceptionally difficult case, Ryan looked up at Jungkook and saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in months. It was a spark, a light that had been dimmed but not. She felt her heart skip a beat, and for a moment she wished that things could be different. "Boss," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know we can't, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you. If you ever need someone to talk to or just to be with you, I'm here." He looked away for a moment, his jaw clenching. "I appreciate that, Ryan," he said finally. "It means a lot to me." He took a deep breath, steering himself against the emotions that to overwhelm him. "But we both know that it can't happen." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. The air between them shifted, became charged with electricity that neither could deny. Despite all they had been through, the pull they felt towards each other was undeniable. And as they continued to work side by side, their fingers brushing against each other as they passed papers, there, occasionally, under the table, the tension grew. It was as if some invisible forces were drawing them together, urging them to give in to the feelings they had tried so hard to suppress. Finally, as they took a break for lunch, they found themselves alone in the empty break room. The air was heavy with the unspoken words between them, and the air felt thick with anticipation. Jungkook took a step closer to Ryan, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands, brushing his thumbs across her cheekbones. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the tenderness of his. "I can't stop thinking about you, Ryan," he murmured. "I can't stop wanting you." She let out a shaky breath, her own hands finding their way to his shoulders. I know, she whispered. I feel the same way. He pulled her closer. It felt so right, so natural to be with him like this. But even as they gave in to the between them, they both knew that it was only a matter of time before reality would once again. When they finally came up for air, Jungkook looked into Wyan's eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I can't do this again. And then he walked away. She stared after him, feeling as if her heart had been from her chest. She wanted to run after him, to beg him to stay, but she knew that it was too late. They had both already made their choices, and there was no going back. For the rest of the day, they managed to maintain a professional distance, but the air between them was thick with unspoken words and unfulfilled. As they worked together on the case, they found themselves constantly glancing at each other, their gazes meeting for just a moment before darting away again. That night, as Wyan lay in bed, she could still feel Jungkook. She knew that she would never forget him, would never be able to fully move on. And as much as she tried to tell herself that it was for the best, that they had to keep their distance, a part of her wished that things could be different. The next day, she went to the club with her friend Sarah. As they walked in, the pulsing bass and flashing lights, her senses fleetingly taking her mind away from everything else. Sarah led her to their usual table, where they sipped their drinks and surveyed the crowd. Wyan couldn't help but feel a sense of longing as she scanned the faces, hoping against hope that she might catch a glimpse of him. As the night wore on, she danced and laughed, trying to forget about everything. But every time Wyan closed her eyes, she saw Jungkook's face. She knew that she couldn't keep running away from the truth anymore. She had to confront it somehow. Finally, as the club began to empty out, she spotted him across the room, standing near the bar, a drink in hand. His eyes met hers, and for a moment they held each other's gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, and she could feel the of his stare on her. And she could almost taste the desperation in the air. Without thinking, she excused herself from Sarah and made her way through the crowd, her movements feeling both dreamlike and surreal. When she reached him, she stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of longing and pain. And as much as she tried to tell herself that it was for the best, that they had to keep their distance, a part of her wished that things could be different. I've been thinking about you, she confessed, her voice barely above the music. I can't stop. He took a step closer, his features drawn tight with Neither can I, he murmured, reaching out to brush a stray hair from her face. I want you, Wyan. She swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of his spread through her. I want you too, she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. He leaned in closer, Then why are we doing this? He asked, his voice with emotion. Why can't we just be together? She shook her head, unable to meet his gaze. It's complicated, she said, her voice catching in her throat. He let out a bitter laugh. It's like we're standing on the edge of something amazing, and all we can do is watch it slip away. His heart raced beneath her fingertips, mirroring her own confused feelings. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to enjoy the brief moments of closeness they shared, wishing she could make it last forever. I don't want to lose you, she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't want this to be the last time I feel this way. She melted into him, returning his with equal passion. They clung to each other, lost in the moment, oblivious to the world around them. I don't want to lose you either, Jungkook whispered, his voice raw with emotion. But I don't know what we're supposed to do. Wine reached up. I don't know, she confessed, but I know that I want to try. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling and knew that in this moment they were both committed to making this work. They could feel the weight of the consequences, but for now, they were going to enjoy the time they had together. What do we do now? He asked softly. How do we keep this secret? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. I don't know, she admitted, but we'll figure it out together. She reached up, running her fingers through his hair, feeling the silken strands slip through her fingers. For now, let's just enjoy the time we have. After 3 years of being happily married, Wine and Jungkook were sitting on a beach, watching the sunset. Their love story had been nothing short of extraordinary. They had found a way to keep their secret, sneaking off for stolen moments whenever they could, and eventually they had found a way to make it work. They had married in secret, and now they were expecting their first child. The world still didn't know about their relationship, but they didn't care. They were happy, and that was all that mattered. As they sat there, the warm sand pressing against their backs, they couldn't help but reminisce about the past, about the time they first met, the struggle they had faced to be together, and the risk they had taken. It had all been worth it, Wine thought as she looked over at her husband. Jungkook's eyes were fixed on the horizon, lost in thought, but she could see the love and contentment there too. You know, she said, breaking the silence, I sometimes wonder what our lives would be like if we had never met. He turned to look at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I don't know, love. I like to think that we were meant to find each other, no matter what the circumstances. She smiled back, feeling tears well up in her eyes. I do too, she whispered. I do too. They sat there in silence for a moment longer, watching the sun dip blurred in the sky, painting the ocean in shades of red and gold. Eventually their eyes met again, and they shared a knowing glance that said everything that needed to be said. Despite the challenges they had faced, They had built a life together, a life of love and happiness. And as they looked forward to the future with their child on the way, they knew that no matter what obstacles might come their way, they would face them together.
If you really wanna see my face